So I'm slightly artistic. Okay, so this is why you get like red backgrounds or black backgrounds and white lettering and all that kind of thing. This particular one is based on a video series, VHS video, that used to exist in our library years ago, maybe around the time we were born. And there was a 6-part series on Hitler and the Nazis, going back to Hitler's childhood and all throughout and so on. And it was, I was good. I watched the whole thing, but there would be in like the unit breakers or the chapter breakers would have black backgrounds and then white lettering. And so I was sort of inspired by that video series to create a very similar background for my presentation on the creation of the Third Reich. But, and I hear this in my head all the time, they also, besides having the title and the black background, there was also this sound that would come up every single time there's like a change of scene or unit. So imagine this comes up and then the sound sounds something like this. Reich! Yeah. It'd be like Hitler's childhood. Reich! And so every single time I look at this, I hear that sound. Hopefully you will too. But it's all good. Creation of the Third Reich. Let me go back. Let me contextualize what we have going on with Weimar's problems. The Treaty of Versailles. Right? The Treaty of Versailles really damages Weimar from the get-go. A world good with Weimar. I'll just ask while people write, what is Weimar? What is Weimar for us, though? What is the Weimar Republic? How's that? Nice. A democratic Germany that existed before World War II, after World War I, up until the Nazis take over. Perfect. The stab in the back myth. I'm not sure that we talked about that enough. Do we know the stab in the back myth? Perfect. The soldiers didn't lose the war. They were stabbed in the back by all of the leftists at the home front who overthrew the Kaiser, who didn't adequately support the war effort, who at the end of the war were on strike and so on. Socialists, communists. The communist threat as well. We see a couple of different left-wing rebellions, left-wing revolts that happened. The Spartacist revolt, the Bavarian Soviet. They're trying to topple the Weimar democratic capitalist government and create, well, you just saw what they'd like to create, I think, what we just had in the Soviet Union. You got a right-wing threat too. You've got the Kapp revolt, the Beerhall putsch of those early Nazis. Once again, trying to topple and create what you're about to see being created. A right-wing kind of government, but a different kind of right-wing government. The 1923 hyperinflation, that's a problem. People recover from that with the Dawes plan or the Young plan, borrow money from the Americans, pay people off, keep this kind of shell game of reparations going all the way up until the Great Depression. And I'm going to tell you, it's the Great Depression that creates Nazi Germany. It's the Great Depression that creates Hitler. It allows the Nazis to become popular enough to seize power. Hitler himself, wink, he's an Austrian loser for the beginning of his life. He is a young man who doesn't do particularly well in school. He's a wannabe artist, and he doesn't get into the art academy a couple of different times.
Have you seen his art?
I have seen his art.
It's very sad. Looking at it, it's like there's something wrong with it.
I'll tell you what I think is. So it's nice. No, I love that because our thesis would be you can see maybe part of his psychology within what he does, kind of like with Van Gogh. By the way, there's some sort of interactive Van Gogh thing coming to the Twin Cities.
Would that be expressionism? If there's art being sad?
Yeah, kind of. Although it's very realistic, and he's really good at scenes of buildings and just the nature surrounding the buildings. Landscapes, yeah. Here's what he's really into buildings though, because he's sort of like a wannabe architect too. But the thing that he can't draw to save his life, human beings. at all, which is really, really interesting for his psychology. But he's not able to get into art school. He flees the Austrian draft. He flees the draft of Austria-Hungary. He doesn't want to serve Austro-Hungarian, the Habsburgs. He doesn't want to be part of this multi-ethnic state. When he's in Vienna as a young man, failing at art school and sort of just painting postcards for tourists and so on, he's taking in all of this Christian socialist Karl Lueger type anti-Semitism, and looking at Austria-Hungary as a horrible thing because it's a multi-ethnic state instead of a strong, unified, homogeneous state. He flees, he goes to Bavaria, he goes to Germany, World War I breaks out, he joins the Bavarian regiment and fights for all 4 years in World War I and loves it. Hardly anybody loves World War I or fighting in World War I, but he likes it because it gives him a purpose. He doesn't really have any leadership potential according to the officers around him. He never advances more than 1 rank. He becomes a corporal, and he doesn't even really serve with other guys very much. He's a messenger. He runs around battlefields delivering messages. Pretty brave, apparently. He wins the Iron Cross First Class, and so is kind of devastated towards the end of the war when he's gassed and he's back in a military hospital when the collapse happens. He doesn't see the soldiers not fighting anymore, and he believes the stab in the back myth because he's not there to witness his brother soldiers not fighting anymore. After the war, he doesn't know what to do. He's just driftless, aimless once again, and he is employed for a very short period of time as a kind of spy or snitch for the government. He's supposed to go around and watch these radical groups in Munich. And one of the radical groups he's supposed to go watch is this National Socialist German Workers' Party. It's kind of a mouthful. And he goes and he sits there and he's watching them. There's 18 other guys who are there. And he's like, I'm not going to watch them and spy on them. I love these guys. I'm going to join them. They have great ideas. And he becomes then their speaker. He becomes somebody who gives speeches to support the kinds of things that this National Socialist German Workers' Party is spouting. Here's what he spouts all the time, usually in beer halls when you're slightly drunk. It sounds better. He hates the Treaty of Versailles, wants to do away with it. He hates democracy and wants to do away with it. He hates communism. You get the point, right? He hates Jews and kind of wants to do away with them too. He tailors his speeches to his audience, but like I said, at this point in time, his audience is basically drunk, nationalist, anti-Semites. The term National Socialist German Workers' Party has a number of sort of lies in it from the very get-go. Nationalist, yeah, they're nationalists. National Socialist. Workers, hardly any. German, yeah, well, except for him, he's Austrian. Anyway, he got his racist nationalist ideology from Austria-Hungary. It just gets magnified over the period of time that he's in the war and then after the war and all these time that he's giving these speeches. He believes in creating a state based on a kind of blood tie nationalism. You are a German by blood. Like he views himself, okay, politically or whatever, at one point in time he was Austrian, but he doesn't view himself as Austrian. What the heck is Austrian? He views himself as a true German person. And there are true German people and there's true other kinds of people. He doesn't know anything about genes or DNA, and so they talk just a lot about blood ties. He believes also that the German people are descendant of these Aryans, this group of people who are better than everyone else. This is our kind of Darwinist racism once again, rearing its ugly head. Aryans are the master race, and as such, the most fitted for survival, and they should dominate all others. Questions? Comments?
We'll just go along with him being Austrian and say, nah, Germans are the ones.
Yeah, because once again, Austrians for a lot of people it's a relatively new thing. And you have the borders just move around a lot. At one point, prior to 1871, what is a German? Like, what's a German citizen, right? And so I think that a lot of people are more than happy with him just being German. A lot of Austrians would like to be German. World War II, I think, will cure that of the Austrians. If you call an Austrian a German now, they get really offended. So, good point. And then he is going to be made a German citizen around the time that he becomes leader of Germany, officially. There he is. Given a speech later on. I think the thing that you don't realize oftentimes when you look at him is he has these freaky blue eyes. You know, the kind of blue eyes that Cal Ripken had? Like kind of an icy blue sort of freaky thing that freaks you out.
Stares into your soul.
Say what?
Kind of stares into your soul.
Yeah, kind of stares into your soul. Yeah. There was a girl in my neighborhood growing up, Sharon Metzger, how I can remember that name. She had those freaky blue eyes. And then a kid I knew in high school, David Zander. These are all like German people, right? They're German-American people. David Zander, my dad was afraid of David Zander. He just seemed to be really off. He was. He saw pterodactyls out in the desert, apparently, at one point in time. I saw it on Facebook. He was on the news for it. I mean, anyway, sorry, I digressed. Mr. Barron, I have freaky blue eyes. Well, he does his beer hall putsch, if you remember. They tried to take over the Munich town government. It's November of 1923. They're trying to capitalize on all of this hyperinflation that's happening. Topple Munich, topple Bavaria, topple Germany. It doesn't work. He's sentenced to prison for 4 years. He spends 9 months in a really cushy prison with a secretary another guy, who is typing whatever Hitler says to create this book called My Struggle, or Mein Kampf. Hitler's goals in Mein Kampf are very clear. He wants to undo the Treaty of Versailles. He wants to rearm Germany at the same time. He wants to expand the borders of Germany. He talks a lot about Lebensraum, or life space. And he wants to essentially undo the loss of World War I. Remember how there was this Treaty of Brest-Litovsk, where the Russians, the Soviet government, really surrendered to the Germans. It gave up this huge territory in the far western part of what became the Soviet Union. Hitler wants that back. And he wants to populate it. He wants to settle it with blood Germans. There are a bunch of people who already live there who are Slavic people. And those Slavic people will be enslaved and then in some way done away with. Apparently Hitler wants to starve them to death at some point in time. That's sort of the big plan. He wants to also solve what he calls the Jewish problem. Jewish people existing, I think, is that problem for him. He believes with his heart and soul that Jewish people are an evil influence in world history, that they control things from behind the scenes, that they are, they're just bad people. I know it's kind of crazy to think about, to try to understand the Nazi mentality. But you can't really understand the Holocaust or Nazism without sort of realizing that they actually believe these things. Very strange. The Nazis are insignificant until the Great Depression happens. Truly, getting very few votes. Nutty people are voting for the Nazis. Normal people are laughing at them. And then the Great Depression happens, and then anything is possible because people are so darn desperate. The Center SPD, Catholics and Socialists, this coalition, or these two parties that usually run Germany, can't really run Germany in this time of emergency. This government dissolves, and in fact, you don't really have very much parliamentary democracy happening after that. 1930 is more or less the end of elections and parliament, different coalitions of parties getting together and running in a democratic way. The president, the old field marshal from World War I, is behind the scenes appointing chancellors. And so he appoints, one right-wing guy after the next right-wing guy, and nobody really knows how to deal with the emergencies of the Great Depression. The reparations payments in, but that doesn't really shore anything up, or really doesn't solve any kinds of problems. Trade has collapsed. German unemployment is sky high in 1930. People are miserable. People are desperate. They're willing to gamble on letting this guy who everybody laughed at before, a guy with seemingly, if you read his book and believe his book, and some people actually got through the first page. Most people didn't. It's a really hard book to read because it's so terribly written. But if you could get into it and read it, you would think either this guy's a madman or he doesn't really mean it. So let's give him power. Because he's not really going to be able to take over Eastern Europe. He's not really going to deal with the Jewish problem. He doesn't really believe that Jews are this evil that need to be destroyed. And yet he does. So the seats, the number of seats in the Reichstag that have uniformed, jackboot wearing, swastika armband wearing Nazis increases from 1930 to 1932 exponentially. Before the Great Depression, 12 lonely Nazis. And then in 1932, about a third of the Reichstag is occupied by people who despise the Reichstag. They despise parliamentary democracy. They're just intent really on overturning it at some point in time. There's about 100 communists in the Reichstag as well. Who's controlling them? Like puppets? Stalin. That's right. Stalin's telling them what to do. It shows you that more than, I'd say 40%, 40-some% of the people sitting in the Reichstag are radical left or radical right. You have unemployed people who are swelling these political armies that the communists have, the socialists have. Everybody has armed people who are, paramilitaries for their political party. The Nazis have the Sturmabteilung, or the SA. They're also just called the brown shirts because that's what they wear. That's part of their uniform. And the communists have the Red Front battalions, the RFB. And these two groups in particular fight each other in the streets constantly with knives and clubs and brass knuckles and sometimes with guns. They are, outnumbering the police. And normal people are really kind of scared of all this violence and try to, hope that it goes away. There's a real fear of a left-right civil war that could possibly break out. Communists and Nazis, and then a whole bunch of normal people who just don't want the violence. I would say that the SA or the brown shirts are sort of like the 2.0 version of those Free Corps right-wing veterans from World War I. Here are some of those Sturmabteilung, those brown shirts marching through the streets. They're basically just thugs. They beat people up. They break up other people's demonstrations. They destroy shops, break into opponents' newspapers, and destroy the printing presses and beat up editors and all that sort of thing. Just kind of nasty people. Well, the elites, once again, they look at Hitler and they say, he doesn't really mean it. It's just Hitler being Hitler. Let's give him power. We'll saddle him with power so he has to be a more normal politician. We'll burden him with responsibility, and then maybe he'll be able to figure out some of the problems that the German state is facing. President Hindenburg then does what he's been doing. He appoints this guy as chancellor. It's a really kind of a bold move. Hitler is, as I said, an Austrian loser, even at this point in time. If you think about where Hitler came from, he's petit bourgeois, uneducated, kind of like, for somebody like Hindenburg, he's kind of trailer trash. Am I allowed to say that?
Yes.
Okay. Hindenburg is a Junker. He's an aristocrat. All the people who Hindenburg has appointed chancellor have been, right-wing rich people who are educated. Now he's giving this guy a chance. The old elites are underestimating Hitler. They just think he's a normal guy and he'll be a normal politician. They don't get Hitler. They don't get Nazis. I'll pause for a second. I'm talking a mile a minute. Sometimes you guys like to say stuff. So. We're good? Question? All right. I love this photograph because I think this shows you really the difference at this point in time in Hindenburg and in Hitler and their social backgrounds and who they are and the way that people view them and the way that they view themselves in a sense. Do you see it?
Yeah.
I mean, even his height. Hindenburg is this giant, and Hitler is just this little man, and he looks awkward in a suit. Hitler doesn't like to wear suits. Hitler likes to wear, uniforms, which is what he'll just show up in once he gets his revolution started. But I just really like this. Yes, sir. It's like a little kid and an adult, really. You can understand how Hindenburg really wouldn't fear this guy until he needs to.
You can also tell how he doesn't know how to socially interact because he's not looking Hindenburg in the eye.
That might be part of it too, but it also could just be, this is the guy this guy in World War I is a corporal. He's just a nothing, right? This guy runs the entire army in World War I. He's showing his deference and his respect to him. Not looking up at him. It's really pretty amazing.
Doesn't Hindenburg die?
Yeah, sadly, and this is a huge
And
problem.
doesn't everything go to hell after that?
Yeah, it starts with this. This is the beginning of the Nazi Revolution. This Dutch guy, who apparently is a communist, and apparently is not really. He's a little bit slow, I guess. He is found at the Reichstag, at the Parliament building, essentially with oily rags in his pockets and matches, and the Reichstag is on fire. It burns down. There is a Reichstag fire caused by, I'm going to do with air quotes, caused by this communist guy. This is the pretext for the Nazis to say, aha, the communists are trying to overthrow Hitler and the German state and create a Soviet Union of Germany. Therefore, we have an emergency situation. We got to do something about this. Does that make sense? Are you suspecting something that I'm suspecting too? Was he just a dupe? Was he just a plant? And the Nazis are actually burning down the Reichstag and blaming him. It's classic. Well, the seizure of the Reichstag fire is the first step. They say it's the first step in the communist revolution. So they need to pass a bunch of laws to give Hitler dictatorial powers. And so in March of 1933, an enabling act is passed. This is going to enable Hitler to be a dictator. And they passed this in the Reichstag without the 100 or so communists being able to vote. On the pretext that wouldn't the communists vote against this because they're in on the plot to overthrow the state? So they don't allow the communists to show up. They do allow everybody else to show up, but this place where they're meeting is surrounded by those stormtroopers. And the stormtroopers basically tell the socialists and the Catholics and everyone as they're going to go vote, you better vote the right way. If you don't vote the right way, you're not going to be getting out of here alive. And so they vote in emergency powers for Hitler, and all the freedoms, the bourgeois freedoms that you would expect of the Weimar Republic are repealed. Suddenly, all of the opponents are rounded up, all of the communists, many of the socialists, a lot of the politicians of the Reichstag are rounded up and concentrated in makeshift camps. Eventually, they will become more and more not makeshift, but more and more real as a place to be sent.
What happened to the other parliament members once?
They get rounded up and sent to concentration camps for the most part.
Like everyone that's not Nazi?
Not everyone, but for sure the communists and many of the socialists. The people who are on the left
What about the center people, like your normal guy, John?
Sometimes. Not super often because they're taking over. They have to coordinate everybody within Nazi society. They're not going to just immediately round up everybody.
So John is safe.
So what?
So is John safe?
Which John?
I don't know.
Yes, Johann is safe for a period of time, but Karl the communist is going to have a real problem. He's going to end up being jailed right away. There's some elections around that period of time. The last elections that the Nazis allowed happen, they get about 44% of the vote, never a majority. And the weird thing is they're really getting support from all kinds of Germans. Rich, poor, middle class, lower middle class, Catholic, Protestant, so on. Just all kinds of people, for whatever reason, like the Nazis. Well, the Nazis want to coordinate society. That's the term that they use. It's called Gleichschaltung, coordination. They want to create everything, and we'll see you can kind of, if you want to, you can kind of summarize things. Make everything Nazi. That labor unions are a powerful way to block a dictator. There's usually two giant parts of society that can stop a dictator. One is organized labor. Do you know what the other one is? Big enough, powerful enough to topple a dictator. Yeah, the army, the military. So the labor unions become the National Labor Front. They Nazify the labor unions, put Nazis in charge of the labor unions, and then they're not labor unions anymore. Does that make sense? Labor unions are supposed to be organized labor that can defend against the outside, capitalists or whatever. If you're taken over by fascists or Nazis, or heck, even communists, you're not independent anymore. Stop it. All the non-Nazi parties were outlawed. The state governments are done away with. The old, Bavaria and Württemberg and Prussia and all these kinds of things are changed. They changed the boundaries, the borders of the inside of Nazi Germany, much like the French did during the French Revolution, to get rid of the old and bring in something completely new. This the new term that they use for this little state or these little counties are called they're called Gaus. So you get like a Gauleiter, a leader of a Gau is the local person in charge of this particular place in Germany. Do away with the old, bring in a completely new Nazi regional map. All organizations that continue to exist are Nazified. Germans love to join organizations. They just like to be organized. And so there's organized hiking groups and organized card playing groups and organized parakeet lover groups. And there's organized teacher groups. All that has to be called National Socialist, happy hikers on the weekend. Otherwise, it doesn't exist. And then also you gotta Nazify it up a little bit. You gotta put a swastika on your hiking boots. So if it's the Parakeet Lovers Club, you have to make little Nazi swastika armbands for the parakeets for their wings. So it's all Nazified. Boys are enrolled in something called the Hitler Youth.
Is that like the Boy Scouts of America?
It is the Boy Scouts, basically. But the word Hitler in it kind of tells you what they want these boys to be doing. And let's be honest, the Boy Scouts are also kind of a paramilitary group. The things that you learn in Boy Scouts are kind of paramilitary skills. It's just much more blatant and obvious when you have somebody called the Hitler Youth. The Hitler Youth are given daggers instead of like pocket knives. I'm going to carve something. It's here's your dagger. Now go stab somebody with it, kind of thing. Because that's what they want these boys to do. Someday I'll stab somebody with this knife or a different knife. They teach them hate. They teach them the ideology. And they don't know any better, right? A lot of kids turn their parents in Nazi Germany. Their parents are old communists or socialists. They say something bad about Hitler, and they go to their local, Hitler Youth meeting, and they're like, my dad said that Hitler's an ass. Whoop! Dad's rounded up, and sent to the concentration camp. And that kind of stuff happens a lot. Girls don't have quite as cool of a name for their group. It's called the Organization of German Girls. There's no thought there, right? It's actually in German. It's Bund Deutscher Mädel. It's boring. Young people, so very important to totalitarian states, so important to Nazism. They teach the girls to do what you would think Nazis want girls to do. And the boys are supposed to be little soldiers. And I love the creepy poster. No wonder Jojo Rabbit had an invisible friend who was Hitler, right? Here's big Hitler behind this Aryan kid. All 10-year-olds go to the Hitler Youth. And the girls the boys are playing war all the time. The girls get to stay healthy so they can breed. And they kind of do away with bourgeois morality. They want boys and girls to breed together, and they don't care about illegitimate children. They encourage this kind of thing. Because what's every child in Nazi Germany? Yeah, a better person, right? For the world that they're going to plant in Eastern Europe when they take it over. They want to populate the world with these so-called Aryan people. So the girls get to hang out, do gymnastics, and learn to be good breeders, I guess. That guy right there is Ernst Röhm, and he's kind of the last person that Hitler has to bump off before becoming the Führer. As Bobby reminded us, Hindenburg is dying. He's dying of cancer, actually, when he allows Hitler to become chancellor. This guy, Ernst Röhm, is the leader of the brown shirts. He's the leader of the SA, the stormtroopers. And by the time he's murdered, there's about 1 million men dressed very much like those Hitler Youth boys who are these thugs for the party. And Hitler decides that he has to do away with Ernst Röhm because Ernst Röhm could overthrow him, the military, organized labor, or perhaps his paramilitary. And so Ernst Röhm and a bunch of the other leadership of the SA or the brown shirts are murdered in July 1934. President Hindenburg is on his deathbed. They say, President Hindenburg, the brown shirts were trying to overthrow the state. We just dealt with them. We shot a bunch of them. And he says, well, good for you. Thank you for doing that. You're a good guy, Hitler. And he dies. Hitler then becomes both chancellor and president in a completely new thing called Führer, or leader. Once again, just kind of stealing Il Duce, stealing Mussolini's thing. Mussolini is also called the leader. They knock off, by the way, Bobby, they bump off John.
Oh.
Then there's a bunch of people who get murdered sort of randomly. There's a bunch of knocks on the door and people open up the door. They're like, yes, bang. Why did you shoot my husband? Well, he was a general.
When did you shoot the wife as well?
No, not usually.
How much is a man?
Nazi ideology is romantic. In the terms of romanticism of the early 1800s. Not romantic in terms of, love stuff. It's a revolutionary romanticism. It's kind of like a reaching back to an era when rationality and reason, they don't want that. They want emotion. Do you get that? They want, sort of a return to the Middle Ages, their version of the Middle Ages. Feeling over thinking. It is also gruesome and grotesque as well. It's also super Darwinian. Do I need to say more, or can you just nod? Anti-Semitism and anti-Bolshevism are its two main pillars. You can't get away from Nazism without realizing that the Nazis want to destroy communism and they want to destroy Judaism. But they want to destroy all of the communists and they want to destroy all of the Jews. They have to do this. They believe that those two things are actually interlinked. They think that Jews created Marxism in order to mess with the world. Marx is, Jewish, has Jewish ancestry. Anyway, you can't really explain it. Like I said, it's all very irrational. There's a Führer cult. Hitler as the guy, the one person, godlike. Women in their second sphere at home. Christianity barely tolerated. Nazism becoming beyond Christian. is really what the Nazis want you to do. Like Nietzsche said, they love Nietzsche. Nietzsche wouldn't have liked the Nazis, but nonetheless. I think I can probably spend the rest of the time on this. There's a class that is added to German school curriculums called Rassenkunde, or racial science. And all the kids get to learn about this twisted Darwinian worldview that came out of the late 19th century, dividing up people. This is just like what we talked about before, but just sort of curricularized and scientificized, I like making up words, and putting people into various classifications. All of it's made up, but they're really convinced that this is truth and science. You probably know, or you probably hear this kind of thing, the perfect Aryan. What's the perfect Aryan look like?
Blonde hair, blue eyes.
Blonde hair, blue eyes, yeah. But there are lots of other Aryans, like Hitler, freaky blue eyes and dark hair. And in fact, if you ever get a bunch of Germans together, you realize that they're not the same kind of people. If you go from different parts of Germany to different parts of Germany, they aren't the same. They look different. They're the middle of Europe. They're just made up of a whole bunch of different peoples. But nevertheless, once again, let's just forget about the reality and let's just go with Nazism. They're into eugenics. They want to create the master race. They want to further the propagation of the master race. In order to do that, you have to stop certain people from breeding. And so this is why they start to force sterilize people already at the very beginning of the Third Reich. Starting in 1934, going to 1945, between 300 and 400,000 people were forcibly sterilized so that they couldn't breed. Whoever the Nazis decided was unworthy of producing life were sterilized. And so, it's a lot of people that you can possibly imagine, and then other people too. Career criminals and vagrants and so on, and alcoholics, just whoever they just decide. But for the most part, it's people with different kinds of disabilities. They even have a word called the term lives not worth living for people who they don't consider worthy of life. We're talking mostly about handicapped people or people who are in various kinds of institutions who can't take care of themselves. They start to murder those people as soon as the war breaks out, with the excuse of, among the Nazi leadership, we don't want to feed them. We don't want to care for them. They're a burden on the war effort. They're part of the home front, and they're just taking resources. This T4 program that they begin in October of 1939 kills people through starvation, if they can't complain about it, or gassing with carbon monoxide, or injecting them with various kinds of drugs in order to do away with them. And then they send a letter home to people, to their families saying, we're sorry, your loved one died of, fill in the blank. A flu, a seizure, a heart attack. As I said too, anti-Semitism is also a pillar of Nazism. That part of the story is yet to come. But remember that there is always this plan for Lebensraum, that the center of Europe, or this Eastern European territory, is going to be taken over. The people who live there are going to be done away with, and then it's going to be repopulated with Germany. Questions, comments?
There was never any was there ever any organizational attempts to try to stop this once he was in power?
Yes, the Catholic Church complains about some of the things that the Nazis are doing, especially as it relates to doing away with people. And there's a bit of a fight between Hitler and the Nazis and the Pope and the Catholic Church over those kinds of things. A bit. It doesn't get serious enough to where the bishops are thrown in concentration camps or anything like that right away. And Hitler has to tread carefully. I think he learned from Bismarck that taking on a third of the German people is kind of dangerous. But there's a little bit of Catholic resistance.
Second, did they try to burn the Bible?
They try to, once again, they don't do away with Christianity. This isn't Marxism. They don't think it's the opiate of the masses, but they do have a kind of Nietzschean view of Christianity, that it is it's a religion that encourages weakness and encourages mercy, and it's kind of a religion for slave people. And so it's best to just forget about that and get beyond the Christian religion. But they don't really make serious efforts to do anything about that. If you're a top Nazi, and most all those guys, including Hitler, were Catholics growing up, they're not religious. They get beyond religion, like a lot of people do. And they start to dabble in, I don't think we talked too much about this, they start to dabble in weird Nordic cults, like Viking cults and stuff. So, have a nice day. Yeah. Yep.
Thank you.
Thanks, see ya.
Oh, you use guitar?
Any questions from home? Please. Plenty.
Thank you, Mr.
See you, Jackson.
What was the question?